very nice to be here in Madrid. I see some people up there a long, long way away. I hope you haven't got vertigo. I'm very pleased to be down here. It's much easier to be on the floor than up there very high. I'm going to ask and hopefully answer a question, which is, how brilliant are our minds? Now, you heard from the previous guy that he is a highly connected human being. And I am also a highly connected human being. I have to do a little bit of origami here with the microphone. So I carry a mobile phone with me all the time, and I get very nervous if I'm not with it, so I guess I'm a bit of a cyborg as well. But my question really is, are these machines going to get more powerful than us? They're getting stronger and stronger, more and more powerful each day. And Moore's law means that they're doubling in power every 18 months. So does that mean at some point, my mobile phone is going to be smarter than me? Now, we've already had one effect. So Watson, an IBM computer built about 10 years ago, contested on Jeopardy. Jeopardy is an American quiz game, and that asks general knowledge questions. And IBM was able to beat the two top Jeopardy contestants, the one that had won the most money and the one that had won the most times in a row. And then, about a month ago, IBM announced another chip, and this is a Synapse chip. And Synapse tries to model the human brain. It tries to look like the neurons that we have, and it's connected together in multiple dimensions with model synapses. And again, this chip at the moment is about 1 million gates, about 100 connection for each of those model neurons, and it's growing in power. We would presume, according to Moore's law, it's digital technology, it will double every 18 months. So the question is, when does it become smarter than us? So it's a simple mathematical question. You just multiply all the numbers up, and I reckon that Synapse becomes more powerful than us in about 2053. So, if that's going to happen, what happens to us? Do we become the computer's pet? So we, like Steve Wozniak believes, we're like a dog, you know, that's sort of going to run around on the floor and be petted by its computer pet. Well, I don't think this is the case. I think that we do something that computers don't do, and I think that thing is that we invent and create things. So, who am I? I'm obviously James Tagg. I'm an inventor. I'm a bit of a mad inventor, and I invent all sorts of wacky things, and some things that you've used as well. When I was a little boy, I was known as a mad inventor, or an inventor. No, I was known as a mad inventor from the age of 8. And I used to invent things for my mum. I invented something to scare cats off her roses so they wouldn't get eaten. And then I used to build a lot of radios. I was quite interested in radios. And I built a radio, and it didn't work terribly well, but one of the really interesting and useful features of it was that if you tuned it exactly right, it would interfere with and block other radio stations. It only did it in a kind of 50-yard radius. This wasn't illegal or dangerous or anything. And it was able to turn off my sister's radio stations. And my sisters were into pop music, and I wasn't. I was a classical musician. And so I could turn off their radio station, then go in and to their room and say, oh, I'm terribly sorry, your radio doesn't seem like it's working. But look, classical music is working. You could listen to that. And then a few years later, I explained what I'd done, and they were very annoyed. But they're still friends now, right? So I have a fascination, really ever since being a child as well, with what inventing or creating is. If you do it, you often get fascinated with the art of doing it. And if you go back into antiquity, into Greek times, they didn't acknowledge that inventing or creating existed. They thought that they were basically channeling information from the gods or discovering information from the gods. And that what was happening if you wrote a play or something, it was simply documenting the human condition. Or you were writing down some mythology that had been handed to you by the gods. You weren't actually creating a work of art or a literature or a machine or something yourself. This was the creation happened outside you. And then in the Renaissance, this changed. And Leonardo da Vinci, as we all know, started writing down and drawing his inventions. And they were very, very strange-looking things. And then we had this river of innovation that ran from the Renaissance to today. And we invented printing, of course, which spread knowledge around the world, the camera, railway traffic, which opened up America and allowed people to move goods around the world. Then we invented the postage stamp, which allowed people to communicate over long distances. And then at the beginning of the 20th century, we had really, I think, a speed up. And there's lots of debates of whether technology speeds up or doesn't. And in really 5 years, at the beginning of the 20th century, we invented flight, powered flight. We invented the radio, the ability to send signals in long distance, quantum mechanics, relativity. And at the same time, mathematicians started to ask questions about the nature of knowledge. Could knowledge be discovered mathematically by machines in some sort of mechanistic way? And then towards the end of the 20th century, of course, the internet appeared, and we had this avalanche of internet-enabled knowledge-based startups, including, of course, my own. So I've invented a couple of things that have had wide-scale adoption. And the first thing I invented that had wide-scale adoption was a type of touchscreen. I didn't invent the touchscreen. That was a chap back in Tektronix, something like 1940, and he put wires in front of a cathode ray tube and touched them. But I did the first ones where you had transparent optical coatings on liquid crystal displays. And you could touch them, and you could detect where your finger was, and obviously the display then moved, and so on. And I put that technology into quite a number of different touchscreens, and it gives me a bit of a buzz today that I'm never very far from a touchscreen that's got my technology in it. Why do I invent? Well, I invent because I get annoyed. We all get annoyed, right? We all see things that don't work, and most of us just go to the pub, or of course, if you're in Spain, you go to a bar, and we drink, tell our friends that we have some complaint with the world, something doesn't work. But I obviously do that as well, because I'm a human being. But I don't stop there. These things tend to haunt me, and I think about them for long periods of time. And then usually at some point, an idea will come to me. So you probably saw my little kind of video I did for the Congress about coffee, and it annoyed me that coffee is sludgy, and if you make coffee and then you leave it for 10 minutes or 20 minutes, it becomes very metallic and disgusting. And so I made a new type of coffee, the upside-down coffee. And the video was going to go live for the show, and I felt I couldn't just have this idea go public without protecting it. And so I went online and I filed a patent, and that's a patent on upside-down coffee. I do have a laser pointer, but it would be exclusatory for half the audience. But you can see my little patent there, and that's sort of a description of upside-down coffee, and it's filed with the patent office, so maybe I'll get lucky. So Truphone, I was making my touchscreen chip in Cambridge, England, but I lived at the time in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in America, and I was traveling backwards and forwards across the Atlantic every 3 weeks to see this chip progress. And I had a big problem because I had an American cell phone, which I took with me, and it was $6 a minute to make a phone call. Now, this wasn't so much of a problem because the cell phone didn't work. I didn't have any coverage in the lab in Cambridge. I didn't have it any in my home in England. I didn't have it if I visited my sisters, which we heard about earlier. And I was in this laboratory, and then this is where serendipity happens in invention. The same laboratory was also working on Wi-Fi chips. And I looked at these Wi-Fi chips, and we all know about Wi-Fi now. And I thought, well, these chips are going to make little cells of radio, and they're going to be all connected into the internet, and a new type of cellular network is born. And as you do, I went to the pub, and went drinking with one of the guys from the laboratory, and I said to him, there's a new type of cellular network going to be produced here. And I went home and I filed a patent, which is my software cellular network patent, and that actually got granted to the United States of America 2 days ago. So that was 13 years. So being an inventor takes a long time. It's a long period of time to go from an idea to an actual granted patent. So what I have now with the Truphone network is really the application of the internet to cellular. And of course, we realized when I made that sort of idea that we would have Wi-Fi cells, there were only 10,000 hotspots in the world. And so we immediately realized that being walled into sort of a Wi-Fi only idea was a bad idea. And so we did deals with GSM operators, and we now have a worldwide internet linked up GSM network. And the big advantage of that is the death of distance, right? The internet gives you this death of distance, which means you can be in America, but you're no further than if you were in England. And the benefit for that is that you can stay in touch with your loved ones. You don't have to worry about the price of data and things like that to get back home and keep in touch. But back to this question that I asked at the beginning about whether robots are going to take over the world. Are they going to overtake us? We all know that they do chess already. And if you're sort of thinking as a scientist like me about these questions, then what you'll end up doing is trying to run some experiments. And the experiment that I ran on myself was I decided when I got to the age of 40 to try and learn the piano and try and learn it quite well. And if you read things like the talent code, you'll know it takes about 10,000 hours of practice to learn the piano, or anything, golf, whatever, tennis. And I'm about 3,500 hours in. And what I discovered as I sort of learned the piano is there's this big difference between the digital technology of looking at notes on a page and playing the piano with your fingers, which is essentially a digital task, and the expressive, emotional, analog task of imparting a piece of music. And I thought about this long and hard, and I mean long and hard, and I looked into the maths behind this difference between creativity and sort of digital rote computing. And I'm going to prove to you that we are creative beings and we're different to computers, and I'm going to do that by using exponential Diophantine equations and show you the Wiles paradox. Now, I've just talked about some very complex maths. I've probably lost half my audience now. But look, it's not that bad because you all know one of these equations. It's the square on the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the squares on the opposite two sides. Or you know it from Spanish. Let me see if I can murder your language. El cuadrado de hipotenusa es igual a la suma de los corandos de los catetos. But done visually, right, it's this 3-4-5 triangle idea. So in a 3-4-5 triangle, you can, that works. And there's a mathematician from 400 years ago called Pierre de Fermat, and he was a slightly annoying guy, I suspect. He was a lawyer, and his hobby was mathematics. And he had a book called Arithmetica, which is an old book from sort of Greek times, ancient times. And what he did was he went through all these problems that Euclid and Pythagoras has left us from antiquity. And in the margin notes of his book, he'd say, I solved this one. I've solved that one. I've solved that one, right? But he wouldn't actually write down how. And after he died, his son published it. And it then became a sport for mathematicians to work out what these problems were, to solve these problems. And the last one that was left unsolved was Fermat's last theorem. And Fermat's last theorem says that you can solve the problem, the Pythagoras problem, for a 3-4-5 triangle, but you can't do it, and it would, I've got a microphone, so I can't do all my, I'll wave my hands around a bit. You can't do it for a solid or a hypercube. And the chap that I spoke about earlier, Hilbert, had at the turn of the century asked the question, which is, can a computer solve this problem? Can a computer solve a Diophantine equation? And this took a long time to answer this question, but in 1970, a mathematician called Matievich proved that you can't solve it. He then took another 16 years to prove that you couldn't automatically solve Fermat's last theorem. So you can't have a computer go through and just mechanically work out a proof of Fermat's last theorem. And then, in 1995, Andrew Wiles found a proof. So, you have a paradox, right? A computer can't find a problem, a solution to Fermat's last theorem. And by a solution, I mean a theory that proves it, right? So a computer can't do that. That's a proven thing. But Andrew Wiles has. So he can't be a computer, right? If he was a computer, it would form a paradox. Now, there's an objection to my theory, or this theory, right? Probably not mine. And the objection really is that Andrew Wiles is not a general purpose computer. He's a special purpose computer. And I've got to agree with that objection, right? He could be a special purpose computer. But let me show you why that doesn't really give us an inventor. So I can go to Google. You've all got a special purpose computer in your pocket that could solve Fermat's last theorem, right? Your mobile phone, if you've got a laptop with you, if you type in what is the answer to Fermat's last theorem, I did it this morning, you get the proof, right? So there's a special purpose computer that can answer the question, what's the proof of Fermat's last theorem? It can solve that problem. But you know that's not really what we wanted. What we wanted was some inventive, creative process that could find it, not just a mechanical lookup, indexing its way through search. To sort of go into the problem mathematically is quite hard, but earlier in the 20th century, a chap called Gödel gave us a way to understand why this is. And really his explanation was the difference between truth and proof, or let's say rules and common sense. So let me give you the example of the London Marathon, right? So in the London Marathon, it was first run in 1970, and at the end of the race, the two runners who'd been running together all the way to the end of the race looked at each other and held hands as they crossed the finish line. What was the result of the race? This is the audience participation section. What was the result of the race? A draw. Thank you. Right. But the rules of the International Athletics Association, Rule 164 if you want to look it up, say that you draw a line on the floor, an imaginary plane is projected up, and the first bit of the first athlete to go through the line is the winner. So what should we do? Well, I think we should extend the rules. Let's add a rule. Let's add the holding hands rule. Now I can look in the rule book, and the answer to my question is there. It's in the rules. But if I was an evil athlete, what I would do is, as I got to the end of the race and I wasn't quite catching the guy in front of me, I'd reach out and grab his hand. Now I'd forced a draw. So what we now have to add to the rules is the concept of consent, right? Both parties need to consent to holding hands. So it's starting to become subjective. What would happen if I crossed the finish line and I had consented to hold this person's hand, but then I realized I'd have to share the €100,000 prize with him? Oh, I don't want to do that. I didn't really mean to hold his hand. It wasn't consensual, right? Now we've brought into the concept of lying and the legal system and intent and so on. And so the problem is, well, actually, one more example. Let's say I held out my hand to grab this athlete's hand across the finish line, and accidentally it caused him to trip and fall over. What's the result of the race there? So the problem is with rules, it's impossible to add enough rules to explain the result. You just cannot do it. You keep adding rules and you run out. So what should we do with these amazing creative brains we have that can do something that computers cannot do? Well, I think what we should do is solve great problems. And really, I feel I shouldn't go through all these problems because many of these problems have been the subject of big lectures here. But if you look at some of the things that we're trying to solve, you know, the ability to get rid of war in the world, the big physics questions of where does the arrow of time come from, why can I remember yesterday but I can't remember tomorrow, is mathematical. Are all the problems that we have to solve when we solve some complicated mathematical problem to send trucks, shipping trucks around the United States to drop off all of the goods? Is there a quick shortcut? Can we use the fact that there's enough sunlight falling on Spain to power the world many times over to abolish using fossil fuels. And the question that I'm sort of most interested in, which is, how does our brain think? How do we think? Is consciousness, is the fact that I'm going, oh my God, I'm sort of here lecturing to you all and talking to you all, you know, and I have this feeling of awareness and being a person. Is this a special thing? And I think we should spend our efforts, our creative efforts, on this. And this is something that machines can't do. I did write a book, sorry, it's a bit of a shameless plug, but the interesting thing about trying to write a book is I was able, with modern technology, to publish this book on Amazon, despite the fact I speak no Spanish. Obviously, you've heard my murder your language just a little earlier. So machine translation is becoming sufficiently good that I could do some quite interesting machine things. But I don't think a machine could have come up with and written a book in the first place. And certainly at the moment, a machine couldn't have done the translation to take my ideas and turn them into hopefully coherent Spanish for you all. So thank you very much for listening to my talk.